YouTube. So what is up? If you notice something a little different, I'm not in the shop. I'm in the garage. And today, we're messing with my sport bike.
Perfect.
It's a 2007 GSXR 600, custom paint, full exhaust, airbox, mod, tune, the whole 9 yards. It's a cool little bike, but it's spring. You see it's still on the battery tender, and we're about to do some spring maintenance. I'm going to lube the chain, change out the coolant, and change the oil. And then ride a full tank of gas today. At least that's the plan. So I thought I'd show you guys how to do some of that. Let me get this fairings off. You got to get the fairings off on both sides on this to do the coolant change. And it just makes it a little bit easier to do the oil change. So I'll get those off and turn you back on, get you back with me. Alright, so I got the fairing off. So the things we need are little drain plug down here. I know I changed the oil before parking it for the winter, so it's got a fairly new oil filter, so I'm not worried about that. But here's our drain plug for oil. We'll also need to disconnect one of these hoses for to drain the coolant system, and then the chain's probably the easiest thing. You just kind of spray it. So I already broke this loose, so let's take care of that real quick. See, you can tell it's really not that bad. I changed it a couple times in a season, so we'll do that. Let's come over to this other side. We'll go ahead and pop the cap for the oil. And let it drain out a little faster. And voila! Doesn't take long. These things hold just over 2 quarts of oil. So it really doesn't take long at all to get the oil out of these things. Alright, so I got all the oil out, put the drain plug back in. I like to check the end of the drain plug, look for any like bearing material or any other metal that's got a magnet on it. If it looks like a metal paste, that's just some bearing material. Filling is pretty easy. You just take the cap out, it unscrews by hand, and then you got a little fill window. The trick is to get it about halfway. Generally I'll put a couple of quarts in it, and then when I'm done with everything else, I have to start it anyways. And I like it to get warm and check it again. And then when I get back from my first ride, after changing oil, I check it again. So let's knock that out. This time I'm using Mobil 1. I do like to use synthetics in my sports, actually all my bikes. I feel like they just last longer and they take better care. And you do need motorcycle specific oil. This sports bike, so I'm using the Racing 4T, and the Suzuki calls for a 10W40. And just carefully add it. Sauce it up. I feel like the Mobile One's a good bang for your buck. There's other brands out there. If I had plenty of money, I'd probably use the Motul stuff. That's probably one of the best ones out there. I don't really buy the factory oil. I don't feel like it's worth it for the extra money that they charge for it. And it's pretty much the same thing. And the ratings on the Mobile One's pretty high. I used to run the Castrol stuff. I came from racing like a lot of imports and stuff. You know, most of the brands are pretty good. On my sports bikes, I try not to use some super cheap brand. On like Harleys and stuff, I do not buy the Harley brand. That's definitely you're paying for a sticker there. Because Harley doesn't make their own oil. See where we're at. Okay, we need some more out of the other quart yet. I said it uses about 2.5 quarts. This is my 3rd quart, so I'm gonna put part of it in and then check. And part of it in and then check. You could use a funnel. I feel like you don't need to. The opening's right here. It's about half. Perfect. I'm gonna leave it right there. I'm gonna show you what that window looks like. There you go. If you look, you can see it's a little over half full. I'm sure once I run it, it'll go down. I'll wipe that up, and then we'll move on to the cooling system. All right, onto the cooling system. So we need to remove this hose. Some of the motorcycles have a little plug that looks kind of like this. I don't know what Suzuki's deal was on why they made it so you have to remove the hose to drain it. But if you have it, that plug will be down on the bottom. This might be the same kind of plug, but Suzuki tells you to remove the hose. But I like the ones with the plug. You just undo the plug and it'll drain it right out. I don't know why they did this setup on these. But manufacturers recommend replacing your coolant about every 2 years. I know it's been 3 years on this one, so it might come out pretty nasty. And then I forgot to mention on the oil, I generally change my oil at least once a year. Every single year it gets an oil change, depending on mileage or how hard I ride the bike. If it's a sports bike, I might change it 2 or 3 times a year. It just really depends. But let's get this loosened and get all this water out. I got my old nasty drain pan down here, so let's take care of that. The first thing we got to do is take this band loose. I know this is probably overkill. Let me grab my screwdriver. Oh look, it's already leaking for me. Good. So take this band loose. Almost completely undo that bad boy. This hose should come loose, and then we're going to get water probably everywhere. There we go. Now that that's slowed down, I'm going to pop the radiator cap on the other side. You know what? That actually came out way cleaner than I thought it would. If this comes out looking mucky and dirty, you'll want to refill it with water and then drain it again. Maybe start it up just a couple times, give it a few revs to circulate it. But mine actually came out pretty clean. I'm fairly happy with it. So once this drains all the way out, we'll put this hose back on, and then I'll show you how to refill the coolant system. If this is the first time changing your coolant, or if you use the factory coolant in your bike, that stuff is straight up poisonous and it tastes sweet. So you want to keep it away from like animals, kids, stuff like that, because it absolutely will kill them if they ingest it. Another thing that's good to do right now is go through and fill your hoses, right? Make sure you don't see any tears or anything. Make sure they're pliable, you know, no cracks. Mine looks like it's good to go. Pretty happy with it. They seem nice. All right. Another thing we're going to do is pull this little hose right here. So we'll drain our little overflow tank. And then we'll do that real quick and then refill it, and I'll show you what you need to do to properly burp one of these to make sure you've bled all the air out. So I figured I'd show you this real quick. My hose was being stubborn, so instead of trying to fight with this being plastic, you can just take your reservoir off. It's just a 10 millimeter. You just take it and dump it upside down. Sometimes that's easier. Obviously mine's been on there longer. The hoses still look good, but they're starting to stick to the plastic. It's not a big deal. But we'll fill this thing up. I use a combination of, where'd I set it? Either the red water wetter or this purple, Royal Purple Ice stuff. And then if you're going to use it with water, make sure you use distilled water. The boiling point on normal water is way too low, so it can cause your bike to overheat, and you know, none of us want that, especially on these Suzukis. They have enough issues with that as it is. So what I'll do is I'll mix this stuff together, and then I'll pour it in, and then we'll shake the bubbles out. All right, so this is a point where it's definitely nice to have a funnel to get down in there, because otherwise you're just going to be having a really hard time, especially with the water of trying to get it in there. So go ahead and put the Royal Purple stuff in first. I remembered I never mixed it together before, so I don't know why I would now. But use the Royal Purple or water wetter, whatever you want to use. I'll pour most of the bottle into the radiator, all but just a few drops. Right, so just a tiny bit left. I tend to just throw that into that reservoir, just that way it has a little bit of either the water wetter or the Royal Purple. The main thing that stuff does, yes, it helps lower the boiling point of the water to make it cool a little bit better, but also it lubricates and treats the water to make it more stable for your motorcycle. All right, and then this is where I might make a mess. We add our distilled water. I always tend to make a mess when doing this, but at least it's just water, right? See, I'm spilling already. Now your bike should use, I think, 2.5 liters. And this is a whole gallon, so that's, what, just short of 4 liters. So just keep filling and keep checking. Are we overflowing now? Okay, so take it, just barely overflow it, and now you want to rock your motorcycle back and forth. Sometimes it's good to take it off the stand and rock it, but what you're trying to do is get all these bubbles out. You're going to make sure you don't have any bubbles in the system. Right, so just rock it, add a little more. Rock it, add a little more. All right, now the part that might freak some of you out is you need to start your motorcycle and give it a couple blips. So I'm going to take it off the battery tender here. So once you're satisfied that no more bubbles are coming out, and you've got it about half full, if you see, it's to about here. There should be a line that says warm on the Suzuki's. It's on the other side. So, and even if it's a little too full on this part, it'll overflow, so you're fine. But once you're sure no more bubbles are coming out, just put the cap back on. And as far as the cooling system is concerned, you are good to go. So I'll put the caps back on wherever I set them. Right? And then we can move on to lubing the chain. Okay, on to probably the easiest part. So you really should clean your chain before doing this, but this is super simple. And this is a good time to check your chain. You should clean your chain and spring. However, I plan on getting a new chain this year, so we're just going to lube it. And the thing is a lot of manufacturers recommend just using gear oil anyways, but I have this Lucas chain lube, so we're using it. If you want to clean your chain, WD-40 works well. You probably already have it in your house. All that the chain lube really does on modern chains is corrosion resistance. There are little bearings, roller bearings in there too. It helps lube those a little, but honestly it doesn't do a whole lot. As you can see, this can get kind of messy, and so depending on what type of bike you have, you might want to take a little more care than me. But I ride these things in pretty much everything but snow. Once it starts getting cold, I turn into a wimp. I put my bikes away. But until then, I just ride them. I don't care if it's rain or anything. I don't get worried about getting caught out in the rain. At least not on any bike I currently own. If I had some super nice custom bike, yeah, I know this has got some custom stuff on it, but I mean, it's not that kind of motorcycle. There you go. Chain lube. Easy as can be. I don't recommend putting it up on the center stand or rear stand and turning it on and just letting your wheel turn. You have way too high a risk of this thing just taking off on you. So I think what we're going to do now is I'll wipe some of that excess off, put the body paddles back on, and I think it's time to go for a ride. All right, so all the stuff I showed you is definitely user maintenance. You can even do this with the toolkit that comes with your motorcycle. Should be underneath your passenger seat. If you don't have one, sorry, Suzuki sells them. I think they're like 20 bucks. Anyways, but something else to touch on is this is your spring maintenance. So it's a good time. Maybe go ahead and wash the bike. I generally wash mine after I do whatever maintenance I plan on doing. But now's a good time to check your chain tension, make sure nothing's loose, make sure everything looks good, check your clutch, all your buttons, your brake reservoir. You know, just make sure everything feels the way it's supposed to. Check your tires, your brake rotors, your brake pads, your brake lines, look for any cracks or anything. I mean, just the general maintenance you would go ahead and do on a car, you want to do on your motorcycle as well. It's even more important. And remember, this is spring, so there's still gravel all over the place, so be careful on those twisties. But, you know, there's some basic maintenance for you. I hope that showed you something. I hope a couple of you at least learned a little bit and aren't as afraid to, you know, maybe change your coolant. I know the first time I changed my coolant, I was a little worried. But anyways, hey, I hope you like what you saw. I will have some bike stuff on this channel. You know, most of the time it's going to be the car stuff, but here's some bike stuff for you. I have other tips and tricks maybe when I go to change my tires. Maybe I'll show you guys that. But hey, click like, click subscribe, hit the bell if you want notifications anytime I post a new video. And you know what? I'll see you guys next time. I'm gonna go get coffee at my favorite coffee shop.